Hey everybody, welcome to Jacob's Quest, and tonight I just got back from watching the new Steven Soderbergh movie, Presence, which, if you haven't heard, is a fantastic premise for a movie. Like, this is something that you could easily make, a dozen other variations of this same kind of premise and come out with wildly different results than this one, but essentially doing the same thing. And what I mean is, this is a movie being told from the perspective of a ghost that is haunting this house. And so the ghost, like you as the audience are watching this through the ghost eyes. And so the entire movie is set within just the house. You never leave the house because the ghost, you suppose, is kind of like contained here in some way. And so as you meet the characters, the family that moves into the house, you learn everything because the ghost is just walking from room to room, and it's getting really close to people, and it's getting really far away from people, and you're just listening in on these conversations that they're all having with each other, and then the ghost will suddenly leave the room and go do something else, or it'll mess with something and everyone will freak out, And that's just such a refreshing take on a haunted house story, because I'm sure somebody somewhere has done this before, but I've never seen it, and this is just a really cool idea, so I would not mind them doing this, several different times with different stories. You could have different families, you could have different ghosts, different houses, a different story entirely. So I'm not saying like, oh, make a sequel to this or a spin-off of like this movie. A completely different studio with a different, like, more horror focused or something like that could do this exact same concept and like go their own way with it, and it would be really fun. So what I'm saying is, this is potentially a new version of our found footage type thing, because we had found footage horror movies which were everywhere for a while, and then we've had a handful of the I guess what you would call it, computer found footage movies, or monitor found footage movies. Basically the ones where you're completely stuck, like unfriended, where you're like just looking at a computer monitor the entire time, and the entire movie is just being seen through that. This is like another variation of that, where now you're the ghost, but the ghost doesn't talk. Only occasionally will it move things, and you can kind of just go your own way from there. Anyways, it's a really cool idea. That premise can work in so many ways, and I'm kind of excited to see who like watches this movie and then gets inspired to like make their own version, because that would be pretty fun. So let's go ahead and talk about Presence itself, this actual movie. So the first thing I gotta say, I'm gonna do non-spoilers first, and then I'll get into spoilers. Non-spoilers first. This movie is not exactly a horror movie in like not in the sense that you would think, right? Because you're like, oh, we're following the ghost is gonna basically fuck with people. And that's not exactly what happens. Okay, like this ghost seems to have a lot of patience, and like just like listens to people and like just kind of follows them around, and it's just learning about this family as they moved in, and you kind of figure out what's going on, and you can tell this family's recently been through something, and then there's like a lot of dispute between the family. A lot, this is not like a well structured thing. Like you feel like these two married couple are going to get divorced. These kids both kind of hate each other. Like there's certain family members, like the son, like is just the biggest asshole, and you like you hate this guy immediately, and so you just learn about these characters, and that's what a large majority of this movie is. Now the other thing is that there is some tension and there's some mystery, because you're still like, it feels like the entire movie you're trying to figure out like, what is going on, what is this ghost, what is its relation to these characters, and then even beyond that, like what happened to this family before they got to this house, because something very serious happened, and you don't quite get it until the very end, when there is indeed a reveal, which I'll talk about later. The other thing is that this movie is, it's another way of trying to I guess, explore what the rules are for a ghost, because you kind of get a little bit of understanding without the film kind of outright telling you everything. Like, the ghost never leaves the house, even when it has the opportunity to, and so you kind of have the understanding that, like, okay, so there must be something that's keeping the ghost here, like it can't leave, right? The ghost never talks, so I guess you have to assume it can't. Only very occasionally does the ghost even move things. Sometimes it seems more of like an emotional outburst, like the ghost is reacting to something that's happening, and so lights will flicker and things will shake or fall down. Other times, like only rarely, the ghost seems to be able to like actually just levitate things like telekinetically. Like you don't see like an invisible hand grab it. It's like stuff that's clear across the room is being moved. So you're like, you know, in that cool way, you're like, okay, you're kind of learning like what are the rules of a ghost exactly. I will say the one thing that I wish this movie did, and it didn't really do, and I understand because like it would be a really boring thing to do, but one thing I kind of wish that we explored a little bit was like, what do ghosts do all day? Like if there's no one home and the ghost can't leave the house, what is the ghost doing? Is it just walking around and doing nothing? Because it doesn't seem to be able to talk. It doesn't seem to care to like turn on the TV and just watch TV or something. Like it's just walking around. So I don't know, I kind of wanted to explore that, but the movie, you know, will cut to black during certain scenes when they end, and then just like cut right back to a different sequence where the ghost is now, you know, it's the next day and the ghost is looking out of a different bedroom window, or it's watching someone else. So like it does these like cuts, and I kind of want to know what's happening between those cuts. Is the ghost just like staring at a wall for like 5 hours before something happens? I kind of want to know. So I will say that I wish that they maybe had explored that. Okay, so overall the movie is pretty good. I think even alone for the premise, I would say like go ahead and check it out. But I will say maybe don't go in there expecting Paranormal Activity, like the series. Like it's not going to be jump scare central. It's not going to have like all this crazy stuff happen where it's trying to terrify these people. It's not really that kind of movie. It's actually a lot more heartfelt than I thought it was going to be. So, you know, maybe adjust your thinking as to like what you're walking into. Because I can see easily where like some of the marketing implied that this is much more of a horror movie than it really ended up being. It's more of a ghost story of like a, you know, it's kind of spooky sometimes, but it's also kind of sad, you know, and that's really what it is. All right, so we're gonna get into some spoilers, okay? Because these spoilers are really important. So if you have not like seen any spoilers, like this might like ruin the movie. Not ruin it, but more like, oh, there's a big payoff that you feel after watching it, wondering what's gonna happen, maybe even feeling let down, and then once the thing happens you're like, oh, and it all feels like validated, to me at least. All right, here we go. Spoilers. Okay, so I'm not gonna go into everything that happens, but a couple big things. First, this like mystery as to like what happened to this family beforehand. We know that the daughter had some friends that supposedly OD'd and they died, and like there was like two girls and she kind of knew both of them, and so like that's like this ongoing division between the daughter and the mom, and the mom's like, oh, just leave her alone, she'll get over it, like, and obviously the daughter's not doing okay, and when this presence shows up she can kind of sense it and she thinks maybe it's one of her dead friends or something. And so the whole movie, you don't really get much as to what happened. You're just told like, oh, they OD'd, they were just drug addicts, and the daughter's like, no, she wouldn't have done that, and that's all you really get. And then the daughter kind of hooks up with her brother's new friend that he makes at school, and you know, they kind of get along for a little bit, and you think like, oh, okay, they got a thing going on. But then it quickly takes a dark turn where this new friend is a predator, I guess. I don't know, or just a a sociopath. He attempts several times to spike her drink with some kind of roofie or something that's gonna make her fall asleep, right? Even though they're kind of dating and they're making out and they're doing stuff, he still attempts to spike her drink anyways, and it's I don't know, it's just like the craziest. Anyways, he's the villain of the movie, basically, is what I'm trying to tell you. So even though like you walk into this and you think like, oh, it's gonna be a ghost story and the ghost is gonna be all scary, it's like, no, this is the villain, this is the scary guy here. It's just this teenage boy who's a psychopath, sociopath guy. Anyways, so what ends up happening, like one of the big reveals, the first big reveal, is that this guy is the one that killed the friends. And it felt a little bit like a stretch for a minute, right? I was like, oh, that's kind of a stretch, because how what are the chances that he would be here in her house and get with her when she knew the two friends that died, and he's also the one that attacked them? Like, what are even the chances that they wouldn't know each other, and yet somehow there's like this big connection there. And then I remember that earlier in the film, the brother was like, oh, he came to me, he showed up to, he came to me in school and wanted to be my friend. And then I was like, oh, right, so that means he knew who she was, and I guess she was next on his list for whatever reason. And basically his plan is to murder these girls and suffocate them with like plastic wrap. And I don't know, he just kind of goes on this crazy rambling rant about control, and he just gets real terrifying at the end. And the ghost doesn't do anything while this is happening, and you're kind of like, ghost, to do something. Like you're rooting for the ghost to stop this guy, because the ghost had thwarted his plans earlier to spike her drink, but for whatever reason did not do that this time. And so you're kind of confused as to like why the ghost is not doing anything, especially because the ghost can move stuff. So what's the deal? The ghost goes and wakes up the brother, who had been roofied earlier, and the brother manages to wake up and runs upstairs, and he tosses him and his friend, or the guy, out the window, and they both die. And you're like, oh shit, that's crazy, why would the ghost do that? And then here's the second reveal. The second reveal ends up being that, like, oh, the ghost is the brother the whole time. Because earlier they had brought this psychic lady in, and the psychic lady had kind of talked about like, oh, the ghost doesn't even know like when this is, because time doesn't work the same for the dead. Like, it can be the past or the future or the present. Like, the ghost has no idea what's going on right now. And so the reveal is that the ghost the whole time had been the dead brother who dies in the future, and like, so he basically had to let certain things happen in order to close the loop of his own death, which is really fascinating, because like the whole movie there are certain moments where you're like, is the ghost gonna react to this or not? Because it's kind of hard to decide like what is motivating this ghost that you're seeing everything through, because like sometimes he interferes, sometimes he messes with stuff, and then other times like something bad's happening but the ghost is doing nothing about it, and you're like, ghost, you gonna do something? So when you learn it's the brother, it all kind of like comes together in your mind, and you're like, oh, now it all makes sense. Some things had to happen because he has to die in order for him to have been here in the first place, in order for him to be a ghost. So it's that weird kind of, there's a time loop. Very unexpectedly, there's like a time loop at the very end of the movie. But it all kind of makes sense. It all kind of like logics itself together. And again, that's another like fun thing that they could try in other movies. Like, so completely different stories, different families, different house. They could like do a very similar thing, maybe where the ghost is the bad guy, or the ghost was the main character, and like they're the ones who try to communicate. I don't know, they could go so many different directions with this. I don't know, I'm really, really excited about the potential of what this movie kind of inspires. So as a movie on its own, I really enjoyed it, and it is definitely one of those like, it's kind of like eerily somber kind of movies, where like there's a lot of like serious talks about like death and getting over trauma and all this stuff, right? And it's definitely not, I wouldn't categorize this as a horror movie. You know, it might be sort of a thriller at times, you know, especially with, you know, the sociopath who you know, he luckily he dies at the end, but like it's definitely not Paranormal Activity. And I think that's the one thing that I feel like a lot of people are going to walk into this movie thinking that's what it is, and it's not that. So that might hurt it, I think, in the perspective of, like, you know, the internet. So people are like, this isn't a horror movie, it wasn't even scary. I'm like, yeah, it wasn't really aiming for that, but, you know. Anyways, yeah, I had a great time with this movie. I felt like, you know, I was definitely, like, theorizing. I'm actively theorizing as the movies go on, and I'm like questioning everything that's happening. I'm like, well, why would it do this? Why isn't it over here? What can't it do? What can it do? You know, and I was trying to figure it out as the movie goes on, and I almost want to watch it again now that I know the twist, because I feel like, you know, with more context now of who the ghost is, I'm like, oh, this is all gonna kind of wrap up even more neatly in my mind of like, yeah, this whole thing makes sense now. Now that I know who it is, it makes sense why sometimes it doesn't do anything. It just watches. So yeah, pretty cool. Presence is yeah, it's a pretty great movie. It's a good time. And again, just if you tell people to go watch it, or if you're watching it with some friends, just maybe throw it out there that, like, hey, just so you know, this is not really like a jump scare horror movie kind of thing. This is, you know, it's more of a melodrama thriller kind of I thing about like this dysfunctional family. You know. Anyways, let me know what you guys think about Presence, and I'll see you guys later. Bye.